Well, we finally reached the climax of John's Gospel. We hit the big crescendo last time, remember? The actual climax of John's Gospel was back in chapter 20, verse 28, where Jesus is declared my Lord and my God. Straight after that, John says, and I've given you all this information, enough evidence in this Gospel so that you can believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by believing you can have life in his name. So, what do we need chapter 21 for then? You've hit the climax, John. You've hit the crescendo. You've proved your point. What's the point of chapter 21? Is this like one of Bill's sermons that just goes on a little bit too long, you know? Like, what's his point here? Including another chapter, and what's more, it's not just another chapter, it's back to the same stuff that he said he already used in this gospel. Miracles, fish miracles. Haven't we seen that before? Isn't that part of the body of work that you're saying, I've got enough to prove that this is true? And then another miracle after the climax, and all right, so fair enough, the fish sign became important to the early Christians. The early centuries, the actual sign of the fish became a secret identity mark for Christians. And then in the 21st century, it became a public sign of bad drivers, right? But what's the point of adding all this extra chapter? What's the significance? I mean, we've even got the number of the fish there, 153. We'll have to look at that sometime. But if nothing else, that does show that John gives that eyewitness detail. I was there. When the fishermen make their catch, they always count the number of fish so they can divide it up and so on. That's John's detail that only an eyewitness would have. But it's those details that he actually brings, like, for instance, even the way he describes coming in from the boat into the shore. We notice that John tells the story from the perspective of someone who was in the boat, like a good film director who puts the camera and from the person's perspective they want to give the story from. Well, same here. Peter is already on the shore. How come he's not telling the story from the shore? No, he's one of the ones still on the boat coming in. We see that let's read it in verse 8, the way John describes it. The other disciples, including John himself, followed in the boat, towing the net full. So Peter's already jumped in and swam ahead, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards when they landed, etc., etc. So it's still the perspective of those people on the boat. Why? Because John was there. He was there telling a story as an eyewitness. So John's telling this story, and we note here that the disciples are in Galilee. But hang on, just before that, in chapter 20, they were still in Jerusalem. They were in Jerusalem where all the action happened. Jesus was arrested, Jesus was crucified, Jesus was risen, they saw Jesus. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And now they're back in Galilee. So in the other Gospels, John's always named in the other Gospels. We know in this Gospel, because he's writing it himself, I don't know, is it humility or what? But he never actually names himself. In the other Gospel, they clearly said the sons of Zebedee, James and John. And then in this one, he just sort of subtly identifies himself as, verse 7, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Some scholars have suggested because these disciples have all the action happened in Jerusalem, now they've gone back to Galilee where they're from, and some scholars have said, well, that's a sign the disciples had given up at this point. Let's go fishing. They've given up. But they forget that this is exactly what Jesus told them to do. He told them to meet me in Galilee. look at Mark's version in Mark chapter 16, verse 7. But go, Jesus says, go tell the angel, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So the disciples just simply obeyed Jesus by returning to Galilee. But there's a sort of sense from their point of view of, okay, we've done what you said, we've come back to Galilee, but what are we supposed to do now? There's sort of a lack of sense of direction. We're here in Galilee, but what's going on? And it's sort of that question, that kind of question that we could ask about John chapter 21. What's the point? What's the point of having this last chapter after the climax of the gospel, Jesus is my Lord and my God, back in chapter 20? Well, let's try and dig into it. We'll let John tell his own story here. Let's just listen to it as John tells it from verse 1 again. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Do you love that little touch? It happened this way. It's like he's saying, let me tell you how it happened. I was there. Let me tell you. Verse 2. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, that's me and my brother James, and 2 other disciples were together. So we were together, but we didn't know where to from here. What are we supposed to be doing here? We already saw the climax. We saw the triumph of Jesus risen from the dead. My Lord and my God, he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He died, but he rose. And Jesus, the one we traveled with for 3 years, he did everything. We went back to Galilee because he told us to go back to Galilee. And we're there, we don't know what to do. So Peter says, well, let's go fishing. And so we all, of course, we've got to eat. So we all go back to the old grind, and it is a grind. After 3 years of all the excitement, the miracles, travelling with Jesus and everything that's going on, and now back where we started, back fishing again. That was our old business, and here we are back again doing it. And it wasn't just back doing the old business. It's right back where we started when Jesus first called us. You see, the Sea of Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee, we were back on the same beach where 3 years earlier Jesus had called us to turn our world upside down. And we'd been through all this with him, and now he says, meet you back there. Meet you back there. We were going back to the very place where Jesus was first walking along that same shoreline, and he called Peter and Andrew to come off their fishing boats. And then a little further along, me and my brother James, there we were on the boat, and Jesus called us, and we came in, and we followed him. Mark told it this way. We never forgot this. Mark chapter 1, verse 16. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. 3 years earlier, he called us just like that. We left our dad with his fishing business. We left everything behind, and we followed him. And here we are, 3 years on, after all this whirlwind, earth-shattering life we've just lived the last 3 years with these miracles and Jesus dying and rising from the dead. And here we are, back on the same boat, in the same business, in the same place, doing the fishing again. And if you know the Sea of Galilee, in fact, if you're a professional fisherman, you know the fishing's better at night than in the day. And not least of all because if you can catch the fish at night, then you can be a jump on the competition in the morning to sell your fish. So we do the night fishing because that was the way we always did it. Now, we're back on the boat, all 7 of us, and it's always a long, tiring night when you're a fisherman, but we haven't been doing this for a while, so it's especially hard. And it's a hungry night, a long, hungry night, and of course, as long as we can catch some fish, we'll be all right. That'll take care of that. So we're out there fishing. We're back in business. At least that's what we thought. Look at verse 3. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. We spent the whole night fishing, hour after hour, in the dark, hungry and cold, and we caught nothing. And then the darkness is breaking, morning's coming, and there's someone on the shore, but we can't, it's like 100 yards, nearly 100 metres away. We can't make out who it is. Verse 4, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realise that it was Jesus. And one thing everybody knows, if you've ever done any fishing and you're not catching any fish, there's always some expert around you telling, well, you should try over here, All right? And sure enough, verse 5, he called out to them, friends, haven't you caught any fish? No, they answered. And this person calling out, I'm writing this gospel down, and in that Greek language there's 2 ways you can ask a question. There's a little word you can say that expects a no answer, or a little word you can say that expects a yes answer, and he's calling out, no, you haven't caught any fish, have you? No. Verse 6, he said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. Now, normally, we wouldn't listen to some would-be expert who's telling us where to fish and stuff, but I don't know whether there's something in his voice or whether it's just the fact that we'd spent a whole night of futility. We thought, what have we got to lose? And this is a real long shot because like normal, we have our rowing oar on one side and the net on the other. So by changing the net over to the other side, there's probably even less chance if there were any fish because the oar would have scared them away. But we think, what have we got to lose? So rest of verse 6. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. I'm looking at all these fish and I'm thinking, what is this? What's going on? And suddenly in a split second it took me back to just a couple of weeks earlier when I emptied that empty tomb and saw those empty grave clothes, and I knew it is the Lord. He's risen. He did what he said. And right here I thought there's no other way. All these fish all of a sudden suddenly appeared. It has to be the Lord. Verse 7. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. There's old reckless Pete for you. He jumps into the water. At least he didn't want to show up to the Lord without his clothes on, but he grabs his clothes. Not the smartest guy in the world. It's about 5 times harder to swim in the water with all your clothes on, right? But powerhouse Pete, he still out swims ahead of the boat, and he gets there first. Well, verse 8, we went in behind him. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, but they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. The funny thing is, when we got to the shore, this great miracle of fish that Jesus had just produced for us. We had so many fish. And yet when we get there, Jesus didn't even need our fish. He already had some fish cooking. What was the point of that? He is the Creator. We'd seen him do this before. He created all the fish in the first place. It was nothing for him to create again. That's why we'd come to this crescendo of Jesus is my Lord and my God. Verse 9, when they landed, they saw a fire burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. The fish were already there cooking. He didn't need our catch. It reminded me of when he did that miracle of the fish and loaves for the 5,000. Where did they come from? He's the Creator. He's God. That's how it happened. But he included us in our catch anyway. And all that we'd caught, verse 10, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So we'd been trying to pull this net in with all these fish, and Powerhouse Pete again just grabs it and hauls it in. Verse 11, Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Well, just in case there was any arguments, you know how those people that go fishing and talk about the one that got away and it was this big and stuff, just so there weren't any arguments. We counted them, there was 153 fish, all right. We got the catch. And then verse 12, Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. We knew all right. We couldn't miss it. He was right there in front of us having a breakfast. This wasn't some sort of fleeting glimpse in the car park. This was actually sitting down to have breakfast with the Lord. And we knew it was him. And Thomas was right there. No more doubting with Thomas. He sees him too. And no one dared ask who he was. It was the Lord. But we were in wonder, what were we doing here, sitting down having breakfast with my Lord and my God? What's the point of this? Here we were back in the same place where it all began 3 years earlier, when he first called us, on the same beach, this time eating with him. And how could we forget? How could we forget that on this very shore, 3 years earlier, all this, we left our fishing business, we left our whole life behind to follow him. And as Mark records Jesus' words back at that time, Mark chapter 1 verse 17, come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. And then it hit me, it hit all of us, what we're doing back there. What the point of this miracle, of this fish sign again? We needed this. We needed this reminder of what our mission was, what he told us way back at the beginning. And now at the conclusion, he's here telling us we were not to just go back to our normal life. We had a new focus. That's why he wanted to meet us here. That's why we needed this last chapter of John, chapter 21. You know, this great overflowing catch We notice a couple of details about it. 153, and it's the exact number. Not one is lost. The net didn't break. When they'd done the miracle way back 3 years earlier, the net actually was breaking, but the net doesn't break. Not one is lost. That is our mission. God has a plan. God brings in the haul, but you have to do the fishing. That's the point here. And he promised us in this very gospel, he will do greater things than what he did. How can we do greater things than what he did? Who can produce fish out of nothing? It wasn't about fish. It wasn't about fish. The overflowing of catching of souls as he sends his Spirit from heaven among his people will add up to a far greater number than what Jesus did in his earthly ministry. More than what he did on this earth. And we can see now this connection with the miraculous fish catch here. And what did Jesus ask? You haven't caught anything, have you? As he called out from the shore. And you're not going to catch anything apart from him. It's his haul. It's his plan. But you got to do the fishing. The disciples saw it. They were never the same again. John saw the connection. After the resurrection, the great climax of the gospel, there's this. There's a mission still to be completed. And it's not about fish. That is why John had to include chapter 21. But it's not just for the disciples. It's for us. It's for us. Now, I don't know where all of you are at in your relationship to God. And I don't know about you, but I keep noticing some really horrible things on the news. People, even young people dying for... What if this week you were to die? You'll be one of those people. You have to stand before God, who knows everything. Down to the last fish, he knows everything, but he also knows everything of what you've ever thought, even the secret things, what you've ever done. And he's going to hold accountable. There is an answer to the evil in this world. God's going to do something about it, but he's going to do a whole lot more than what we wanted. It comes down to even the thoughts, the words, the actions. Heaven, a place where no sin can ever enter. How would you possibly enter? And the answer is what this gospel has unfolded from the very beginning, way back at the beginning, where from the first verse, the Word, Jesus, the Word became flesh. Jesus, so the Word is God, and then later verse 14, the Word became flesh. That is, God became a human. Why? Why? So that those things I've done as a human being, that I'm accountable to, that I deserve the penalty for, God can be a true substitute in my place. That's why God becomes a man. We've seen it work through this gospel to the point where Jesus goes to the cross. What is he doing there? He's taking the penalty for all those who will repent and believe in him. That's why he cried, "It is finished." It is taken away. It is accomplished, completed, gone. That you can stand before a pure and holy God with no record of your sin there, because it has been paid for. Now, maybe you already believe that. I hope you all believe it, but maybe you already believe in that this morning. Yes, I believe that. I believe Jesus is what this gospel has proven, that Jesus is my Lord and my God. You already believe that he died on the cross for your sin, and that through repentance and faith in him you can have this life and forgiveness. And maybe you already believe he's risen from the dead, so one day you will rise from the dead, clean of your sin. But that is not the end. That's just the beginning. It's like chapter 21. After all that, there's one thing left. God has a plan, and he wants you to be part of that plan. God has a plan for you to be fishing for fish. God has a plan for you to tell people about this. Yes, it's his haul. He has to do it, but he's called you to be part of his family, to grow the family. And he's called you in the way you live out your Christian life with the people around you. Maybe you're not all called to be street ministry people, but you are called where you are to live out this Christian life, to actually earn the right to be able to share this gospel, to actually unconditionally be loving and friendly to people, because you don't know which ones are the catch and not. You still got to do unconditionally, to actually reflect Jesus in your life, to tell this gospel. And it's not about fish, it's about people, human beings. And how is this going to happen? How do you do it? We're going to have to come back next week to find out.